This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Flex podcast from the Action Network and Fantasy Labs, presented by Yahoo Fantasy. I'm your host, Chris Raybon, and I am joined by my co-host, one of the GOAT rankers, the GOAT ranker in the game, fellow top 6 ranker over the past 3 seasons in terms of accuracy at Fantasy Pros, the odds maker, Sean Koerner. Sean, it's quarterbacks week. What's going on?
Yeah, this is a marker of the season's rapidly approaching. We're finally getting to dive in to our first position today, quarterbacks, and the Hall of Fame game is just in a couple days. So we're going to get to see some of these rookies, with pads on, in-game action. So this is always an exciting time of year for me personally.
Yeah, and I mentioned it's quarterback week for us, so we're going to break down the top 12 quarterbacks on this podcast for the 2025 season. We'll go by the current season-long projections on Yahoo Fantasy. We'll talk about who we're looking to back, fade, where the value lies with this group. Then we'll do it. Our next pod will be the QB2 tier and anybody that we like beyond that. And we'll also do another pod where we go only on rookies. We'll do our little rookie draft again. So got a lot up ahead for you in terms of quarterbacks. But before we get started, if you're getting ready to dominate your fantasy football league, why not use the same projections that we use? Well, guess what? You can. Our Fantasy Labs NFL subscription gives you access to our player rankings, customizable draft cheat sheets, and more. New subscribers can use code FLEX20, that's FLEX20, for $20 off at fantasylabs.com/flex. Now go win your league. Use code FLEX20 for $20 off at fantasylabs.com/flex. All right, let's get into our quarterbacks. The QB1 tier. We'll start Lamar Jackson. He goes off the board QB2, QB1, depends. It's been kind of flip-flopping. Last year, he was the top overall quarterback in fantasy. He's never had a season lower than, QB 10 in points per game. He's always been there. It's just been some years he's missed some games, and that's kind of dinged him a little bit. But Koerner, 41 touchdowns, 4 picks for Lamar Jackson. I've been watching football a long time. I don't know if I've seen a better quarterback season, and the guy couldn't even get the MVP. I think it's going under talked about just how elite he is and was last year, especially for a guy that when he came into the league, people kind of pigeonholed him as a runner. So before I ask you just where you're valuing him, I do want to ask you, what is your touchdown interception ratio projection for this year for Lamar? I know you got some regression baked in there.
Yeah, just incredible season last year. Like you said, 4,000 yards, 41 passing touchdowns, and still, he almost rushed for 1,000 yards. So, his ceiling was unlocked last year, whether it was due to, offensive coordinator Todd Monken, or having, Derrick Henry back there. It made it just impossible for defenses to kind of, try to stop both. So, yeah, I think we're going to see some regression, obviously, in his touchdown interception ratio. I'm projecting him around 28.5 touchdowns with about, 7.5 interceptions. So still, elite, still with the massive rushing upside. So, I don't think it's even possible for him to replicate last season, but he's still going to be very, very good because everything's sort of still in place here. He's still in his prime, so I'm not expecting much regression for him this year, though.
Yeah, I have it pretty similar to you, about 29-9. He's my QB1. I think he's just a little bit less fragile than a guy like Josh Allen, who we'll get to next. But, Lamar, you mentioned the rushing yardage is there, and he's surpassed Allen as a passer, last season. That was just ridiculous. And Allen, which let's talk about him now. I think with Allen, the volume is the one thing that I wonder about because, since Joe Brady took over, they've been a run heavier team. Uh, every year, Josh Allen has been a top 5 quarterback since 2020, but over that stretch, up until last year, he was averaging 34 plus attempts per game every season, 253 plus passing yards per game every season. And then last year, he was at 30.2 attempts per game. I'm not counting that week 18 game where he just took a snap so that he could keep his streak alive, but 30.2 attempts and about 233 passing yards per game. And he also, just 33 rushing yards per game. That's a little bit below his career average of 37. So he's really living on rushing touchdowns, 12 and 16 games, and just ridiculous efficiency. Now, what do you think he lands for 2025? Is there going to be some regression? Do you agree that there is a little bit more fragility there, even though he's been so consistent over these past few years?
Yeah, there's definitely some fragility there because he has been a little bit more dependent on the rushing touchdown department. The past couple seasons, he's had over 10 rushing touchdowns, which really helped make up for the, again, you alluded to it. He had about 600 fewer passing yards than we typically expect from him. So that was a pretty significant drop. And we kind of thought that might be the case with, Joe Brady calling plays. And they had just, lost their top 2 targets in Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. So it was a much more spread out passing attack. I think his pass catchers should be better this year. They lost Amari Cooper, who didn't really make an impact there, and Matt Collins. But they brought in, Josh Palmer, who I love, and even Elijah Moore, who could step up. And I think, Keon Coleman could be better in season 2. So I think his pass catchers should be better this year. But yeah, I don't know if we could expect 4,300 passing yards from him, going forward. So he's going to have to rely on his rushing volume, which I think will still be there. But more importantly, the rushing touchdowns. So it does, worry me a little bit. But again, he's finished top 2 each of the last 5 seasons. So he's just been elite year in, year out. So it's really, him and Lamar sort of in their tier alone for me. And I think when it comes to quarterbacks, we could talk about this, but I typically like to wait at quarterback. But if you are going to draft, whether it's Allen or Lamar, I like to just let the league decide which quarterback comes off the board first. And then if I'm in a good spot, I can just get the guy that didn't go first. So that's how close I am on these 2 guys, where I think, Lamar number 1 makes sense, and then Josh Allen number 2. But if you are going to take one of these guys, I let somebody decide who goes off first and then scoop up the other guy a few picks later.
Yeah, I think I want more Lamar than Josh this year. I think I do see some downside with Josh where it's kind of not really being baked in just because with the current crop of receivers, I mean, we thought Amari Cooper was going to be a lot better than he was last year. It's like right. Guys go to this team to die because they want to spread the ball around. Josh Allen's a great runner. They can get their backs involved in the pass game and the run game. And I just thought that they really started to rely even more on the run game down the stretch last year. And that was kind of telling. So, with most of Josh Allen's heavy pass volume coming in those games, those few shootout games, their schedule is not too tough this year. So I do think, with Lamar just putting up such a ridiculous season, I think, we shouldn't ignore that and say like these guys are super close. I think Lamar's probably more likely to miss games, but if you're just talking about like right. a pure per game average upside, if they both play all, 16 regular season fantasy games, I do think Lamar does have some separation at this point, just based on how well he played last year and what they're doing, volume wise in Buffalo. Speaking of volume, Jaden Daniels wasn't a particularly high volume passer, but did run the ball a ton, almost 150 carries, just under 900 rushing yards last year. He's going off the board as the QB3, around 27th overall. So he's already entered this elite tier of quarterbacks and even jumped Jalen Hurts, which I do think is fair. Koerner, I'll start by asking you this. I think it's interesting that Daniels, he's very efficient as a passer last year, but his passing yards per game was just under 210. Is that something that you see increasing? And if so, how much? I know there are kind of some question marks there at receiver right now. And where are you valuing Daniels heading into year 2?
Yeah, I definitely am bumping his passing yards per game a bit. I have it closer to like 220.
Okay.
He's entering year 2, so I think that's probably where he's going to get better is the passing department. Maybe he'll rely on scrambling a bit less, not much though. Like that is a significant part of his game, but I was really impressed with him. I love that he does, the virtual reality training to sort of speed up his, on-field decision making. Like I think he's going to have a great career. I think adding Deebo Samuel's the interesting thing. I'm trying to see, how he looks in camp because he's so good, after the catch, but last year he was not. And I think that could have been due to, he's getting older. But remember, he dealt with like a severe bout of pneumonia mid-season. I don't know if that impacted him a ton, but like Deebo could be huge for, Jaden getting, 10 plus more yards a game. So I'm kind of factoring that in. We have Terry McLaurin with this contract situation. Hopefully that gets resolved soon. If that spills into the regular season, that's going to be a hit on Jaden Daniels in terms of his passing production. Plus the other thing that I kind of use as context with Jaden Daniels' rookie season is, he was knocked out of that week 7 game with a rib injury. He was expected to miss some games and he played through it. He was a bit inconsistent for a few games after that. So, I kind of factor that in as well. That, he could have been even better if he didn't get that, pretty significant rib injury. So a lot of things going on with Jaden Daniels where I think he could be even better this year. So like I said, I'm bumping up his passing yards per game closer to 220, just giving his supporting cast might be even better this year.
Yeah, it's tough with him because I think he got better as the year progressed too last year. You mentioned the processing, and I just thought by the end of the year, he was just such an expert at, knowing when to scramble, knowing how to keep them ahead of the chains. And at the same time, it's like almost how much better can his season, how much better can he be? I mean, he was just so efficient last year. He was, Terry McLaurin stayed healthy for the entire year. I felt like he got really good seasons out of some of the other guys too, like Zacchaeus and Diami Brown. I mean, Diami Brown got himself a nice little, $10 million prove it deal contract off Daniel. So, and then Zach Ertz was healthy somehow the whole season too. So there's like a lot of competing things where I do have him ranked QB3. I don't mind kind of waiting for Jalen Hurts, if Daniels goes ahead, like that's one where I think there's a little more, there's not as much separation there. So if Daniels is going to go, well before him or even, just before him, and I'm looking for a quarterback in that range, which I'm generally not, but I think the smaller your league size, the easier it is to still get it. Like if you're in a 10-team league, I think it's easier to kind of get a quarterback early and still, fill out your roster with all that, with the glut of frozen pond tier running backs that are still going to be available later on and whatnot. But what are you doing with quarterback in general? Like, are you going for the elite quarterbacks in 2025 more often than not, or do you find yourself waiting? Is it more of a mid-tier year for you? What are you doing more generally?
Yeah. I'm writing up my QB tiers piece today actually, and I broke it down. It depends on the league type. We should probably talk about that. Like if you're in a 2 QB super flex format, quarterback value shoots way up where you see quarterbacks going in like the first round. So again, it depends on your format, but traditional, head to head season long formats where you start one quarterback, I'm still late round quarterback where I'm okay sort of punting it and then taking a flyer on, like a Caleb Williams or a Trevor Lawrence or JJ McCarthy type, just because you have that safety net of the waiver wire streaming quarterback and eventually, ending up with the top 10 quarterback. Like Bo Nix was a good example last year of a guy that, I didn't draft him, but in one of my leagues, I just ended up with him. going forward. So there's a lot more options if you punt quarterback. But I'm not opposed to taking elite quarterback early. I'd say probably from the top 5. Once the top 5 are gone, I'm usually passing at quarterback. But if you get a top 5 quarterback, and you're comfortable with your wide receivers and running backs at that time, you're more than capable of constructing a league-winning team that way. I just typically have better luck and just my skill of just taking guys early on and handling the waiver wire allows me to punt at quarterback. But it's one of those things where you just have to know your strengths and weaknesses in your league in general. But you can win your league with either approach, really. But I would say the quarterbacks like 5 through 10 is probably the dead zone for me when it comes to most of my drafts.
Yeah, I don't mind waiting on quarterback because it does kind of drop off too, where there are just so many quarterbacks available late, and there's not that much differentiation. So yeah, there's certain leagues where, again, if it's like a 10-teamer and I think I can get my starting running backs and wide receivers and my flex my running back 2 spot is probably going to be like one of just interchangeable with a bunch of those like frozen pond guys. I don't mind in certain spots, going for a quarterback if they fold him. I'm never taking a quarterback ahead of ADP or anything like that early,
right.
But if they drop, especially if they drop, 6 overall spots or more, into essentially, into that next round, that's when I'm really kind of looking for quarterbacks. But I really don't want to take a quarterback in the second or even really the third round. But if these second round guys are falling into the third round, especially late third round, or the third round guys are falling into the fourth, that's when I feel a lot better about them.
I'd say the way I put it is I kind of let the position come to me. Like you said, never really want to take them ahead of ADP, but if they fall and I'm in a good spot, that's when I'll be taking a quarterback earlier in the draft.
All right, Jalen Hurts is 4th. He is 4th by ADP as well, going around 32nd overall. He was top 6 in points per game last season. And Sean, I think the interesting thing with Hurts is potential upward volume regression, because if you look at his pass attempts per game over the past 4 seasons, since Nick Sirianni came on board as the head coach, in 2021, it was 29 attempts per game, then 31 in 2022, 32 attempts per game in 2023, and then he dropped to 24.1 last year, and the yardage kind of followed suit. He went from 210 to 247 to 227 to just 193.5 last season. So do you think that he bounces back? Because, it's hard for a quarterback to go 2 straight years averaging 24 attempts and under 200 yards per game, unless you're what is this guy, Justin Fields or something? But Hurts is a lot better than that. So what do you see for Hurts this year?
Yeah, I definitely have some positive regression there. Have it closer to like 27.5. Because, part of the reason he didn't get to attempt many passes is because, Saquon Barkley was just so freaking good. He ran for over 2,000 yards. Had a handful of 60-plus yard touchdowns. So that takes away from Hurts. It kills an entire drive. It gives the Eagles the lead. It puts them in a more run-heavy situation. Plus, their defense was great last year. And both are true heading into this year. So I still think this is going to be, obviously, an extreme run-heavy offense. But, yeah, I still have it closer to 27.5 pass attempts per game. Plus, there was, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert were all hurt at different times. They only played 79 snaps together all season. So that's a lot of time without his top 3 pass catchers, which also hurt, his passing production and passing rate and things like that. So, yeah, I'm expecting Hurts to bounce back throwing the ball. And, we got to say that the tush-push ban failed, which means we will get to see potentially another season of double-digit rushing touchdowns for Hurts. That's something going forward. If they were to ban the tush-push, it'd probably be a big hit for his rushing touchdown upside. But they didn't ban it this year, so I'm projecting him for, 11 to 12 rushing touchdowns this year. So he has a nice ceiling or, rushing floor there. But yeah, I have, his passing yards way up around 3,200 this year and about 27 and a half attempts per game. So I'm with you in that the passing production itself should see some positive regression this year.
Yeah, and remember, Saquon Barkley had nearly 500 touches between the regular and postseason. If Saquon goes down for kind of the same amount of time that some of those pass catchers went down for last year, I mean, we're talking about a guy in Hurts whose career highs over a season are 247 yards per game, 32 attempts. I mean, that would be a significant increase, and that happened. Those happened over the last couple of years. 31 and 32 attempts per game the 2 seasons before. So he could see a big jump, whether it's due to efficiency, whether it's just due to natural game scripts, whether it's due to more injuries at the running back position. But I think he's like teetering on that like massive value. Like he might be, he probably has the most room to grow out of all these elite quarterbacks in terms of where he's being taken relative to his ceiling. Because if he puts up those passing numbers and he's still getting push, touchdowns in the red zone, I mean, he's got that QB1 overall upside, and he could even run away with it if Josh Allen sees some regression in touchdowns or Lamar gets hurt or something like that. So yeah, I do like Hurts at where he's going. I do have him, like he does grade out or project out, I should say, is my QB4, but I think just comparing his ceiling to where he's going and the value at QB4, like he has that QB1 overall ceiling. So Hurts is probably my favorite of those elite guys right now. Joe Burrow, next up at number 5, going 5th off the board, around 39th overall. Was a top 2 quarterback last year, 4,918 passing yards, 43 touchdowns, 9 picks. He's been near the top of the league in attempts over the last 3 years, so that's kept him afloat. That defense hasn't been great. So, Sean, I guess the question is, with Burrow, it's kind of the opposite of Hurts. It's like how close to was that his ceiling last year? I mean, nearly 5,000 yards and 43 touchdowns. We're kind of banking on that for him to be a top 5 quarterback because he's had some years where whether he's gotten hurt or the efficiency just hasn't been there. He's been all over the map in terms of his finishes. He hasn't been quite as consistent, and it's because he doesn't have that rushing upside. So how are you treating him this season?
Yeah, that's an important distinction because he's the first true pocket passer that's being drafted. So he's going to be dependent on some certain things, but I think in Burrow's case, he still has the same upside as we saw last year because. I mean, first of all, the Bengals just throw a ton. They led the NFL with 12% pass rate over expected, nearly double the next closest team in the Chiefs. So they are a pass-first offense. That's going to remain true this year. And the second, which I think is very important, is, their defense was awful. They allowed the 7th most points per game. That's outside of his control, but they should still be below average this year. And, who knows what's going on with Trey Hendrickson. If his holdout spills in the season, they're going to be even worse. So I think, his defense is going to provide him with pass-heavy game scripts still. And third, he still has arguably the best wide receiver duo in the league in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And Higgins missed, a handful of games last season. So if you look at just the games where Chase and Higgins both played, he averaged 24.1 points per game, which would have ranked second on the season. So I think despite he probably had like a ceiling season last year, if you look at it, he was missing one of his top receivers for a handful of games. He was dealing with that wrist injury. I guess he sort of is the rest of his career. It could be like a chronic thing, but he overcame a couple of things last year that might not be there this year. So yeah, I think Burrow's the exception. Usually pocket passers, you're going to see more regression year to year. But I think in Burrow's case, he has proven to be the exception because, again, this team relies on him. The defense should still be pretty bad this year. So I think we're going to see a lot of the same factors that led to his great season last year. So he's my QB5. And like I said, I think once he's off the board, it's, I'm more willing to wait at the position. but I think he's going to be a high floor, high ceiling option again this year.
Yeah, he's a guy. I think that, like you mentioned, the dead zone and starts around QB5. I think he's a guy I want. Like I tend to shy away from just because I do think his floor is lower than the other other guys in the top four, just because of his lack of rushing upside. Because if you look at his prior 3 seasons, yeah, he had 4,600 yards and 34 touchdowns in 2021. Then he had about 4,500 yards and 35 scores. So very consistent the next year. But then in 2023, he got hurt. He had just 2,309 yards in 10 games. So he did decrease. And his efficiency was also way down as well. But you look at his other two best seasons out like before last year, and he topped out, in the mid 4,000s with about in the mid 30s in touchdowns. So I do tend to think that he could see some regression. And with defenses, they tend to regress to the mean, whether bad or good. So that's like, I don't want to count on his defense being terrible, even though I think it probably will be. So right. I just see some, there's just a little bit less wiggle room for him than, these other guys who are just running so much that if their passing numbers take a hit, it's probably because their rushing numbers are going up. Whereas with Burrow, there's just kind of more room to, maybe the Bengals do get better. Maybe the defense gets better. Maybe they do finally run more. Maybe, there's just a lot more things that I think could bring him down a little bit lower than what he was last year. And that does significantly ding his value when you're talking about taking him inside the top 50. Another guy is kind of like that. Baker Mayfield, number 6. He goes QB7 in ADP. Mahomes does go ahead of him, or is starting to go ahead of him. Last season, he posted a top 3 fantasy season. He was just him and that whole Bucs offense just absolutely magnificent. But another guy, I think there is a case for regression. You do have Liam Cohn, who took that Bucs team from 20.5 points per game to 29.5. Last season. Now he's gone after his only season there. He's the coach in Jacksonville. And you look at Baker last year, 265 passing yards per game. He hadn't been over 240 since his rookie year. 2.4 passing touchdowns per game. His previous career high was 1.9 as a rookie, and then 22 rushing yards per game. His previous high was 10. So, I mean, he was probably going to regress naturally, but the fact that Cohn's gone makes me a little bit more weary, especially because the rushing production hasn't been consistent. But, what do you think is kind of more or less likely to hold up, in terms of what he did last year? What do you think is most likely to regress, and where do you think that puts him? Evans 32 as well. Godwin's coming off another injury. So a lot of kind of competing factors with Mayfield.
Yeah, I think, with Burrow, I'm pretty confident, both these quarterbacks are going to see some regression. I don't think they can match last year's numbers, but I'm way more concerned about Baker being able to match last year's numbers because this is just a clear career year for him. I mean, if you describe last year, yeah, he was phenomenal. He finished as a QB5, set career highs in pretty much every single stat. Even, his rushing stats as well, nearly 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. It's just going to be extremely tough for him to repeat that, no matter how good he was last year. And like you said, he's going to have a new offensive coordinator this year, third one in 3 years. So, that could hurt him as well. Mike Evans is getting older. Chris Godwin might not be ready for week 1, although I do love the depth they have by, drafting Mbuka in the first round, kind of helps raise his floor there. But this is just a spot where I'm not even ranking Baker that much lower. I have him QB7. It's not like I'm expecting a huge drop off, but he is not somebody that I'm looking to draft. You're spending way too much draft capital on a situation where his floor could be, outside of the top 12. It's not unrealistic to think Baker Mayfield could all of a sudden become, like a QB 15 type of guy, depending on what happens. So there's just way too much risk here, where, you can get, a quarterback much, much later on with just as much upside. So he's the first quarterback where I'm really not drafting, even though I'm not ranking him that much lower. It's just this part of the draft, I'm still trying to grab running backs, wide receivers, or tight ends But this doesn't mean that, I'm not investing in this offense as a whole. I still like Bucky Irving, Mike Evans in some spots, Ibuka, the rookie, taking some flyers on him. It's just Baker Mayfield. There's so much risk taking him here at QB6 that I'm usually not taking that gamble.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the QB1 tier as a whole, we're going to talk about 12 guys, and and we're talking about guys who are going, near the top of their position. So more of these guys are probably going to finish lower than their ADPs here. And I think you got to kind of fade some of them. I think Baker makes sense to fade at this point, just based on where he's going. I think you want to get in on, the next guy like that. Maybe it's Trevor
Right.
Lawrence, maybe it's a guy like Jordan Love, but I don't see any upside to taking pocket passers in the middle of the draft. I think that's especially true this year, where the market has gotten a little bit sharper in terms of, how they're treating wide receivers versus running backs, where after the, kind of the top tier of running backs go, it's kind of an arms race with wide receivers. And, those guys are just hard to replace. You talk about it every year, how you're not really going to find a top target, a number one target, or even sometimes a number two guy way down in the draft. So those guys are going, and it's just tough to draft a quarterback when there's so much supply versus wide receivers and running backs for that matter, where Baker's going. So yeah, don't love Baker, but hoping he does well, because he is a fun guy to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Happy for him, but he's him and Burrow, those pocket guys. Just those are the guys I'm gonna fade. All right, we're halfway through the top 12, so let's do a segment presented by Yahoo Fantasy, looking at risers and fallers. Sean, so far we've discussed Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Baker Mayfield. So looking at those top 6, who sticks out as the biggest riser this year, and who's missing from last season as the biggest faller?
Yeah, so the biggest riser this year is clearly Jaden Daniels, who was being drafted around QB 14 last year as a rookie. But after that phenomenal rookie season, he's now being drafted as a QB 3. So he is the clear biggest riser. The two biggest fallers, I would say, would be CJ Stroud, coming off that amazing rookie season, was going as the QB 5. He's now going off the board as around the QB 18. And Dak Prescott similarly was being drafted QB 6 last year and is now going around QB 14. So those two guys would be the biggest fallers for sure.
What do you know? Pocket passers. So that
Exactly.
just backs up what we just talked about with Burrow and Mayfield. But those are your Yahoo Fantasy quarterback risers and fallers. We'll get to those fallers here coming up in. As a reminder, this episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy, and fantasy football is back. So fire up the group chat, get those draft boards ready, buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, overreactions, and more. It's all happening, and this year, Sean and I are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too. So whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league, now is the time to get hype. We love everything they're doing over at Yahoo Fantasy, especially the user interface and those post-draft report cards. We're super excited to check out all the innovative features they're going to be rolling out this year. And to celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. It all begins August 4th, so stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy Football League today at yahoofantasy.com/flex. That's yahoofantasy.com/flex. All right, number 7 is Patrick Mahomes. Goes off the board around QB6 now. Him and Baker Mayfield have started to flip-flop. So Mahomes just outside the top 50 with an ADP of 52nd overall at Yahoo. And last season, he was down outside the top 10, around QB 11, 13th in points per game. He was under 4,000 yards, 26 passing touchdowns, 11 picks, just over 300 rushing yards. But Sean, his passing yardage in 2022 was 309 per game. 2023, 261. And last year, 245 and a half. His yards per attempt, likewise, went from 8.1 to 7.0 to 6.8. So do you see some positive upward trajectory yet again for Mahomes now that he should have relatively healthy Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Marquise Brown receiving core, but at the same time, you got a 36-year-old Kelsey. You don't know exactly what you're getting out of the receiving game. In the backfield, Brashard Smith, the rookie, he can do some things in the pass game, but if it's Pacheco or a guy like Hunt or Mitchell, probably not as much. So what are you doing with Mahomes? Do you see him kind of getting back to where he was, or it's more of the same?
Yeah, so I don't have him getting back to, the 300 passing yards per game from a few seasons ago, but I do have him bouncing back to like 2023 levels, around 260, 265 yards per game. Not, the 245 last year, where I think that might be his floor at this point. But I think we could see more explosive plays with Xavier Worthy in year two. A full season of Hollywood Brown, I think, would give him, a deep threat. But like you said, he does have Travis Kelce in decline, which, has been his top target throughout his career. So I think that kind of hurts his upside a tad. With Rashee Rice, it's kind of unclear if he's going to get suspended or not. If he doesn't, I think that's going to be massive. That's just another, weapon for Mahomes to have. But at the end of the day, just this offense just isn't as explosive these days. They're much more willing to be more methodical and just, have these long sustaining drives, which can kill some clock. And he just doesn't have the same upside. But, he's still my QB7 because I am expecting, a bounce back this year. But again, he doesn't have the same rushing upside or really the same passing upside as like a Burrow or maybe even a Baker at this point in his career. So he's still firmly, outside of that elite tier for me now. Despite, being arguably the best quarterback in the league, just in terms of fantasy, he just doesn't have the same upside that we saw a few years ago in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have him ahead of Baker right now at QB6 because, my model, I do, it does kind of learn from a quarterback's past history, like his career, not just, everything's not just based solely on last year. And same thing for Baker and Burrow that we talked about earlier. So they, these guys are all very close, but I am, even if Rashee Rice gets suspended, he's probably playing more than the 4 games that he played last year. Marquise Brown is probably playing more than the 2 games and minimal snaps that he played last year. And I think as targets go away from Kelsey, I mean, tight end targets, even to a guy like Kelsey, tend to produce or like the efficiency ceiling is less than if you're throwing at receivers all day. So I think he, with what they got going on at running back, with what they got going on with Kelsey, this seems like a year where Mahomes is going to be throwing a lot to his receivers. And as you mentioned, but 2 of those 3 guys are speed demons who can go deep anytime they want. And Rashee Rice, one of the most efficient guys in the league, you should get at least double or triple the amount of games out of him as he did a season ago. So, and Juju Smith-Schuster is going to break out for the 3rd time in his career now. It's like it's ebbs and flows with him. So, just kidding. I don't think he is. No, I think Mahomes has. He has enough of a track record. We know how good he is. We know they're looking to kind of get back, to that offense one way or another. And they did. At least, it looks from the looks of it, we'll have to see how it plays out. But they could have a better offensive line this year if things fall into place as well. So that's something to watch. But as of now, yeah, I have if I'm going to be taking a gamble on a pocket passer, I think I feel a little bit better about Mahomes. I know he runs a little bit. Baker ran more last year, but I feel a little bit better about Mahomes just outside of that. With no loss of Andy Reid, whereas I don't know. We don't know exactly how much Liam Cohen influenced Baker, but the fact that we thought Baker had a great year the year before, and then it just went completely nuclear the next year with Cohen. I mean, kind of factoring that in. So yeah, right now Mahomes my QB6.
Yeah, I misspoke. He's my QB6 too. He's 7th in Yahoo ranks, but I have Mahomes clearly ahead of Baker. And another thing to add on is Brashard Smith is getting a lot of work in camp so far, and he's more of a pass catching back, and we didn't really see that with the Chiefs last year with Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco. So if we can see more like a Jerick McKinnon type back, that's also going to boost Mahomes just in terms of passing yardage as well this year.
Yeah, more. He just needs more options. I mean, Pacheco. One of the issues with him, besides the decline in the efficiency, was it was kind of a tip off at times to what they were going to do, because Pacheco is just not as good in the receiving game, and they tried to force it at times, and it just didn't really work. All right, next up we have at number 8 Bo Nix, and he's a really intriguing one because he has that rushing upside, 430 yards as a rookie, 4 touchdowns, can scramble, can do the design game if they really want. And they probably hope they don't need to this year after adding RJ Harvey, after adding Dobbins. But he has that dual threat upside, was a top 10 quarterback last season. Just under 3,800 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 12 picks, mentioned over 400 rushing yards. Sean, what is Bo Nix's realistic ceiling and also his floor? Because I think the reason Nix doesn't get more hype is because people just look at him as this guy that it could just go completely south, like almost like a Justin Fields type, even though I think he's leaps and bounds better and he has a great coach, kind of calling the shots. But what do you see as his ceiling and floor? Like, can he overtake, let's say, a Hurt or a Lamar or somebody like that if they maybe miss a game or two or just have some regression? Or is he kind of locked in outside that top 4? And then what is his floor? How way down there is his floor, given that he can run the ball?
I'm gonna thread the needle here. I think he has a very high floor. Like, I don't see him falling outside of the top 15 if he's healthy, let's say. But I also don't know if he has like top 3 upside necessarily. Now, certainly he has what we want, right? He's a dual threat quarterback. He had 10 games of 20 plus rushing yards. There was a weird 4-game stretch where he just refused to scramble. Not sure what was going on there, but more times than not, he's giving you rushing yards. And he's a good passer. And again, he was a rookie last year, so we'd expect him to get better as a passer in year 2. But I think the one thing that might be limiting him, and it's not even his fault, is just the Broncos have a really good defense. So they're not going to really get into many shootouts. So he's just not going to have to throw much or drop back as much. So I think that kind of caps his ceiling, which it's not even his fault. But, outside of Cortland Sutton, he didn't really have many options. Marvin Mims stepped up at the end of last season. So I think the fact that they brought in Evan Ingram, as long as he's healthy, could unlock, Bo Nix top 5 upside. And I think we'll need to see one of these receivers outside of Sutton step up this year, whether that's Marvin Mims again, or maybe the rookie Pat Bryant could step up. RJ Harvey's a good pass catching back. He's just going to need some other options to really, be a top 5 quarterback. So again, I think just the things outside of his control might limit his ceiling, but I think he's locked to be at least a low end QB1. I think he has a very high floor. So I'm okay drafting him in this range. But again, this is just kind of a weird zone for me where, you could just hold off at the position and potentially get a top 10 quarterback anyway. But I think Nix in general is a very high floor type of fantasy asset, just given his dual threat ability, which we've said time and time again, kind of helps you be a consistent fantasy starter. So that he's got that going for him. So I'm right in line with him being in the QB8, QB9 range right now.
Yeah, I don't he's going 64th overall. I think that's too high. This whole tier, I just don't think
exactly.
To your point, you want to be taking quarterbacks here, but I do have more confidence in him than exceeding value than some of the pocket passers, even though they're much better passer. So I am looking for him to fall, and I do think he'll fall in drafts just because I think opinions of him, he only has a 1-year track record. He didn't blow people away necessarily the way Jaden Daniels did. I think it was a little more nuanced with Knicks, where the more you watch him, the more you like him. But I think he's just gonna really kind of worry people and drafters, and there will be certain drafts where he'll probably drop to probably into the 90s, into the the 8th, 9th, 10th round, just because people go other directions. So he is a guy I'm looking to scoop where I can if he falls, because I agree. I think he has that floor, and when you have a floor, that's always a great thing for your ceiling as well, because I mean, all you need is Josh Allen to get hurt, or Lamar to get miss his 5-6 games instead of none, or something like that. And that ceiling that you say, oh well, maybe it's only top 5. Now he's into the top 3 because he does have that dual threat ability, and he had nearly 30 passing touchdowns last year. He's got Pat Bryant is probably better than some combination of Josh Reynolds and Vele. Troy Frank was probably better than the last year's version of Troy Franklin. That's what we're hearing in camp. Sutton, they still feel good about. He just signed a big extension. RJ Harvey's definitely better than Javonte Williams. J.K. Dobbins is probably a better pass catcher than whoever else was their number 2 pass catching running back last year, whoever it was. McLaughlin, I don't know. Estime. I mean, Evan Ingram was better than Lucas Kroll. So I feel like he's got an upgrade, or he's got and Mims came on down the stretch too. So Mims is a completely different player, I feel like, last 6-8 games. So I'm pretty optimistic about Bo Nix. I think he's a guy that I could see him putting up like a monster Josh Allen like season out of nowhere. I think he's a guy that I am trying to never take ahead of ADP for any quarterback, but I'm fine kind of jumping back in on Nix if I can get him. QB9, Justin Fields. I was a little bit surprised by that. I know, we've been talking him up at times. We'd want rushing quarterbacks, but like the market has kind of gone pretty high on him. He's up to QB 11. I have him as QB 12, but that assumes he plays a normal amount of games, which, I mean, he's already banged up with a knee injury. Who knows ultimately what the Jets' goals are this season. So I do think that by them signing him, they intended to kind of stick with him all year. Like, they don't really have any incentive not to, unless they're trying to tank or something and think. I mean, Tyrod Taylor is probably not going to increase your chances of losing significantly more. So I would think he gets all he can handle. But the interesting thing with Fields is his career averages are 175 passing yards per start and 55 rushing yards per start. So, I mean, do you see any upside beyond that in this Jet offense with really, one receiver to speak of at this point? And do you think he does get to start, a full season and kind of pay off that top 12 ADP?
Yeah, I think his job security should be fairly safe. They have Tyrod Taylor. I don't really see them having a reason to go to Tyrod unless Fields gets hurt. But I mean, I feel like Fields has always been underrated in fantasy as a result. We're usually talking him up, just saying he has massive rushing upside, so he should be going, much earlier in drafts. Whereas this year, it's kind of crazy to see him going in the top 10 in a few of my drafts. He's gone inside the top 10. Yep. So I think that it just comes with more risk because he does rely on his legs a ton. So he's, more likely to get injured, miss games because of that. But also this offense, they have Garrett Wilson, who's one of the better young receivers in the game. But outside of that, they don't really have anybody else. So it's going to be easier for defenses to slow him down and then Fields from there. So this is just a really tough situation to be using this much draft capital to take him. It's kind of like Anthony Richardson last year, who was going super high, where you could just get, a guy with similar upside way, way later in the drafts. Maybe that is Anthony Richardson. But this is just way too early to be investing this much draft capital on him, despite him obviously having massive upside given his rushing ability. But this is just a range where I'm staying away from taking a guy like this inside my top 10. There's a couple guys later on that you can get with the same upside at a much cheaper cost. And in this range, I rather, again, just be taking another running back, receiver, or tight end than, taking Justin Fields here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's Justin Fields and then like Shedeur Sanders. The market is probably too confident in, and Russell Wilson. And what do you know about those three teams? Like New York football teams and the Browns, like factories of sadness. Like I think it's probably shouldn't be overrating any of their quarterbacks too much, especially not the chalk. So yeah, he's my QB 12. I think a lot of it just comes down to, is he going to be healthy and get to start the whole year? Then he's gonna be in that discussion. But yeah, I mean, this is also why you can kind of call this a dead zone and kind of take one of these guys is going to drop, whether it's Bo Nix or Fields. And, a guy we'll talk about in a second is another guy with rushing upside. But before we get to him, you got Brock Purdy, and he clocks in number 10. He goes around QB 12. It depends, though. He can go as high as 9 or 10, but he can go as low as 14. He's got a little wider range sometimes. Last year, he was just inside the top 15 overall, around QB 12 in points per game. So borderline QB 1, but it was up and down with him. He had some really good games, some really bad games. But in his career, he's another guy that really I think he's really difficult to project because, do you just let the regression do its work, or do you how much do you factor in the Shanahan offense? How much do you factor in the musical chairs at receivers? Because for his career, he's at 257 passing yards per game, but he's gotten there on 9.0 yards an attempt, which is just unbelievable. And this year, as I mentioned, we don't know what's going on with Ayuk. You're not going to get a fully healthy version of him until mid-season or later. You got Debo is gone. You got, are you going to have a full season of McCaffrey? Kittle had a full season last year. Is he going to be able to reproduce that? You just got a lot of question marks at the wide receiver and pass catcher positions in general. So what are you doing with Brock Purdy? Is he a guy where you do have a wider range of outcomes, or is he one of those guys where he's kind of got like a high floor cap ceiling?
Yeah, he's definitely like a higher floor guy, but lower ceiling. So I'm in this range, but he's not a guy I'm trying to draft here because of everything you pointed out. There's a lot of question marks because he's losing Debo Samuel. Brandon Ayuk might not even be playing until week 5, and who knows how healthy he'll be then. So he still has Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall there, and it's important to point out that the 49ers don't use a ton of 3 wide receiver personnel, so they can get by with 2 good receivers. And I think Jennings and Pearsall will be fine. So he has George Kittle. I think that's the most important part, that George Kittle's still there. Christian McCaffrey's healthy and who's an excellent pass catching back. But if, the injuries start piling up from there, then, that really lowers his projection. And the one thing I will point out is last year we finally saw him tap into that rushing upside. His rookie season, I kept screaming to the roof, whoever would listen to me, that he did have more rushing upside than we've seen. He just wasn't tapping into it for whatever reason. But last year we finally saw that. He ran for over 300 yards, had 5 rushing touchdowns. So he has more rushing upside than I think people realized. But he's still more of a pocket passer that kind of relies on his pass catchers being healthy and things like that. So I think QB 10 is a bit rich. This isn't the range I like drafting a quarterback anyway. Plus, when you're talking about, season-long head-to-head leagues that start one quarterback, I already did my initial week 1 projections. He's at Seattle week 1, and he's my QB 16. So if you draft him, you might be playing somebody else week 1. Which isn't good. And that kind of highlights why I don't draft guys in this range, is because sometimes there's going to be guys available on the waiver wire that I have ranked higher for that week. So he's going to be very matchup dependent of when he is, a top 10 option. And that's why, this is a range where I'm not drafting a player like Purdy. I'd rather just invest in the skill players on the 49ers than the quarterback itself in the situation.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting because even with that ridiculous efficiency, I mean, you average 9 yards an attempt. I mean, you'd think you'd be at like 280, 290 per game,
Yeah.
but it's been a generally they try to keep the volume in check for that Niners team. And this is their year where they surprise everyone and go to the Super Bowl again, right? Like that's how they go. It's like have a horrible season and then everyone writes them off, and now it's like, all right, back to the Super Bowl. So I'm joking, but they actually do have statistically the easiest schedule in the league by a lot of metrics. So it could be one of those years where the volume does kind of limit the upside regardless. Probably maybe even more so than the pass catchers, because he has kind of Shanahan. I mean, he had Nick Mullins and all these guys looking super efficient. So it might not even be a question of the pass catchers, but just kind of the volume of the offense. But Kyler Murray is number 11 in that same division. He goes off the board as QB9, but much more palatable, 95th overall. And last season, he was a QB10 overall, but points per game a little bit lower. And his career high, I mean, we looked at Trey McBride last year in terms of the lack of touchdowns, but Kyler Murray's topped out at 26 passing touchdowns, 1.6 per game that year, 1.7 in terms of the per game average. But either way, that's going to get you, that's not even going to get you to 30. And last 3 years, he's been very consistently around 1.25 passing touchdowns per game, which over a 17 game season projects out to right around 21. So his rushing yardage has been there around 30 to 38, all except 1 year. He's had over 50, just over 50. But I think it really ultimately comes down to the passing touchdown upside, Sean. And I know that is a stat that does tend to have some regression, but you also kind of get more of a sense of a quarterback's traits the longer he plays as well. So, like, how are you projecting his passing touchdowns? Because I think that's kind of his make or break at this point. He got some massive upside if he could, throw 30 touchdowns plus. So what are you doing with him?
Yeah, so I have his passing touchdown projection right at 21, which is how many threw last year, but he played every single game last year, so you got to factor that in. So, I mean, I'm pretty much in line with his stats from last year, but he has said that he's feeling a lot healthier and he's going to be more willing to run this year, at least to start the season. So I think that's going to be huge with Kyler. That's always, what we're relying on. But I think he does have a higher ceiling in terms of passing touchdowns this year. And it all depends on his chemistry with Marvin Harrison Jr., who, was their first round pick last year. They weren't on the same page on downfield throws. That's never really been Kyler's game, but they have been working on it this camp. I've heard it's been getting better. We'll see if that spills over in the season. But if he can unlock that with Marvin Harrison Jr. and have, an elite tight end like Trey McBride, that's how we're going to get like a ceiling case for Kyler. And I think he still has, top 5 upside if that were to happen. So if he's going outside the top 10, this is a range where I'm typically not drafting a quarterback. But if he falls outside of the top 10, he would be a player that I would consider drafting just because he does have that dual threat ability. And just a ceiling that we might not have seen with him yet with, a pass-catching duo and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride plus his rushing upside. So, again, I think Kyler in the QB 11 spot is definitely worth taking in spots.
Yeah, I could, he's not far off. He's my QB8. He's not far off from my QB7. He's about a tenth of a point per game behind Baker Mayfield. And right now I have Mahomes projected somewhat aggressively. So, if we find out that, maybe his receivers aren't going to be what we thought they were, or, whatever, not in camp, I could probably end the offseason as high as QB6 on Murray. I actually have him at 23.5 passing touchdowns. So you just typically see in that kind of offense, with the amount of points I have them projected to score, you typically see more passing touchdowns than Kyler has been throwing. So I do have a little positive regression for him in that category. I think 1.25 per game, given the type of offense that we project Arizona is going to be. I think that's just too low. So I do have him with a little more, and I'm pretty high on Kyler. I think he's another one of these guys with he's going to have more rushing upside than most of those other quarterbacks outside the top four, if not all of them, and he still has a lot of room to grow, even efficiency wise. I mean, he's been right around under or right around 7 yards an attempt most of these years, but his career high is 7.9. So if things click, I think he could put up a much better passing season than he has been. So yeah, I'm pretty bullish on Kyler relative to where he's going in drafts. Justin Herbert, number 12. I am not that bullish on him. He goes as the QB 13, so it's not as if drafters are super bullish on him. But I do think, to your point, Sean, about kind of you can wait on quarterbacks in that mid range. I think there's just so much opportunity, and you don't really feel like you're missing out, especially once you get into this Herbert kind of tier of guys where. I mean, Herbert goes as the QB 13. I could make a case that he falls out of the top 20. He's just he's a guy that it's very fragile. He's a very talented quarterback. If you talk about talent, he's right up there with probably just right below a guy like Burrow. But you look at his numbers last year: 23 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and then he double that interception count up in the one playoff game? I mean, it's that's and then. They're talking about, is he going to run more? But when he ran, he got hurt. He tends to get banged up when he takes too much contact. And in last year, he was at a career low 227.6 passing yards and 29.6 attempts per game. I do think the volume goes up, but it's no guarantee that the receiving core really allows for, much more efficiency than he had last year. So ultimately, I have him as my QB 15. Where are you on Herbert?
Yeah, I'm in line with you. I think you could really argue like 8 to 10 different quarterbacks could be in this slot. He's just sitting on top, just this massive tier where any of these guys can have a great season. So whoever you put here was probably going to be overrated. I think Herbert is way too high here. I think I would make a case for him in like 2 quarterback super flex leagues where I'm going to want a more steady QB2 option. I think that's where I would maybe reach for him. But typically, I wouldn't want him unless he falls outside of the top 14 or so. He just has a higher floor where last year he finished inside the top 12, 44% of the time, which ranked 14th. But he didn't have a single top 5 finish. So he just doesn't have that ceiling that some of these other quarterbacks do. And I think that's just better for 2 quarterback leagues. But, when it comes to this offense, we'll see. I think, adding a rookie like Trey Harris, Oronde Gadsden could be a steal in the 5th round at tight end. He could have better pass catchers this year, which I think will help him. But I think at the end of the day, he's just more of a high floor, low ceiling option. So this just isn't the part in the draft where I'm taking a guy like that if it's a 1 QB league. So, like I said, it would have to be a 2 QB league, and he's got to be going outside of the top 14 or so. But this is just a range where you could just wait and get somebody with a similar floor and ceiling combo than Justin Herbert. So this is just a part where when you use my tier-based drafting strategy, this is a no-fly zone for me, no matter who is going right here.
Yeah, and I think Herbert particularly has a case where, you already laid it out with the lack of a ceiling last year, and you got to remember, who's the offensive coordinator there? Greg Roman loves to run the football. Yeah, they took Harris in round 2, but who did they take in round 1? A running back. It's like everything kind of cancels itself out. And there's Greg Roman for his career has been a 89th percentile in terms of rushing attempts. Last year was the first time he had a team finish outside the top 10 in rushing attempts, and the Chargers finished 11th. So he could have a high volume rushing attack. If Harris doesn't hit, you're still looking at a pretty brutal receiving corps. I mean, yeah, Gadsden is intriguing, but he's probably going to split snaps with Disley and Conklin anyways. So there's just not really a ton of game changing upside. And then I don't think he runs quite enough. I know he can do it, but I don't think he does it quite enough. So yeah, he's kind of middling in everything. I mean, he's good as a real life quarterback, but kind of middling in everything. And then if the volume isn't there, that could actually be an issue for him because I mean, you're talking about guys like Kyler going in his range, Bo Nix, and then you still got Fields going, in some drafts lasting as long, and Drake May is another guy that can run. You could just wait and get him for almost free. I know you like McCarthy. I mean, there's just so many guys that we'll talk about on part 2 of this podcast. So look out for that. But yeah, Herbert, I think he's a guy that I don't want much of, especially at QB 12. I think he's kind of a mid-range QB 2 at best. So that's going to wrap it. Part 1, top fantasy quarterbacks episode of the Fantasy Flex presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Part 2 will be out coming up. So be sure to check that out in the coming days. And Sean and I will go through the rest of the quarterbacks that we didn't discuss here and we'll get to running backs, receivers, tight ends over the next few weeks as well. So be sure to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Be sure to check out fantasylabs.com for all of our fantasy football content. And you can download the all-new Fantasy Labs app and use promo code FLEX20 for $20 off right now. That's FLEX20 to save $20 off an NFL sub for the 2025 season. You got not one, but 2 of the industry's top 6 most accurate season-long rankers, according to Fantasy Pros, over the past 3 seasons. And Sean's resume goes back way further than that, people. So be sure to subscribe. Use code FLEX20 for $20 off right now. And don't forget, we're going to have a live event August 23rd. If you're in the Chicago area, we're at Joe's Bar on Weed Street in Chicago. It's free to attend. The RSVP link is in the episode description. So go RSVP and save your spot for that live event presented by Yahoo Fantasy. You can find Sean on X at @_oddsmaker. I'm at Chris Raybon. We're at those same handles on the free award-winning Action Network app. Big shout out to our sponsor, Yahoo Fantasy, celebrating 28 years of fantasy football greatness. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.